You know something? This is probably the most unhyped movie I've went into all year. Probably. Every trailer I saw of this movie, I was like, this looks kind of average to uninteresting, but I see why they gotta make it. This is just another cash grab like Rogue One was, another cash grab just to fill the year gap of lack of Star Wars movies in between Episode 9 and this movie. So, I think the Disney executives whoever was planning the release date of this movie, they're like, you know what, let's just get this out in the summer. We're not gonna wait. We're not gonna let our fans wait until December to see this movie. Let's just get it over with. Get it out there as soon as possible so they can forget it as soon as they watched it. Solo, a Star Wars story, stars I don't know the name of the guy who actually plays Han Solo, because, well, I'll touch on that later. But it basically picks up an anthology Star Wars film, a spin-off showing how Han became Solo, how he went from a random rebel to an ace fighter pilot that we all know and love. And it stars Woody Harrelson, it stars Childish Gambino himself, Donald Glover is in this movie, and a plethora of other characters. Paul Bettany also stars in it, and it basically shows him going from adventure to adventure to become the star pilot we know and love. Starting off, what I liked about this movie, first of all, is it looks very good. The action and the visuals are very well handled. We are in a post-Force Awakens Star Wars era, ladies and gentlemen. It's gonna have beautiful set pieces. It's gonna have great visuals. All the starfighter, all the blaster battles, all the star chases, all the starfighter, TIE fighter chases, all that's there in its full Star Wars glory, and it looks great, as usual. Moving right along, it has plenty of fan service. The interesting thing about these anthology movies is we get all these stories from a different angle. So, I'm not the hugest Star Wars fan, but yet I've seen every movie in the franchise, so I know when they're tipping their hat and they're setting up plot threads for future movies. It is very interesting, admittedly, seeing Han and Chewie pair up and team up for the first time and seeing where their relationship first began. It's very interesting to see where Han and Lando's relationship first began and the full story of how Han got the Falcon, where his famed pair of die came from, etc. The interesting stuff with this movie is the different angles of plot threads from future movies that you get to see for the first time. Plenty of fan service in this movie, plenty of Easter eggs and little references that you won't understand unless you've seen the other movies. They definitely knew what they were doing as far as going for the fan service. The last thing that's just really good about Solo, a Star Wars story, is Donald Glover himself, Lando Calrissian. I have to just put my hats off to him, although admittedly Paul Bettany was really good as the main villain. I was used to seeing I've seen Avengers Infinity War 3 times now, so I'm quite used to seeing Paul Bettany as Vision getting tossed around for 2 hours and 30 minutes, but he makes a pretty good villain here because his slow and elaborate delivery of his lines goes a lot better for a villain's role than a hero's role. He was pretty great as the villain, but the show stealer, the scene stealer, everything about this movie is saved. Not everything, of course, but a lot of this movie's charm is completely saved and salvaged from Donald Glover as Lando Calrissian. This dude brings the humor, he brings the charm, he brings the wit, he brings the charisma. He is amazing as a young Lando. And it's not just that he's written very well, but his performance, etc. He's the perfect example in this movie of how you can't teach charisma. You just either have it or you don't, which rushes right off into the flaws of this movie. The biggest problem of Han Solo, a Star Wars story, is Han Solo himself. The lead in this movie is just boring as, just the lead. How can you have a movie like this and not have a likable lead? I don't know. This is just a role that's frankly been miscast. I don't know who the casting director was, but this role was purely miscast. So many speculated from the trailer, who is this guy? He might sort of look like, he might look the part, he might have the build of a young Han Solo, but as far as his charisma goes, it's just not there. This guy's boring to watch. He's just completely boring to watch, although the character is written very well. There are a lot of situations where I'm like, that's cool, that's totally what a young Han Solo would say in a situation like this. But his performance is just dry as It's very sad to have a protagonist like this as an iconic, as a character of Han Solo, and have the lead be this boring. This guy just didn't do it for me. Han just fell completely flat. That's the biggest problem of this movie. And it's very sad because the first act is another problem in this movie. It's not slow, it's actually very well paced, but a lot of the things that are happening, it goes in so many different directions, you're not interested in following one of them, so you're just kind of along for the ride, like, okay, let's see where this movie goes. So the first act is pretty lethargic. Han himself is purely miscast, and it's really a shame to see Han in such a uninteresting place in the hands of such an uninteresting actor, because the best parts of the movie is when, about halfway through, when he sits down in a casino at a gambler's table with young Lando, and their banter is actually interesting and entertaining. That's where the humor kind of picks up. So it's easier for chemistry and charisma to be a synthetic, just a synergy, an effort worth of synergy, because as soon as Lando comes onto the play, there is a lot of humor that starts to work in the movie, and there's a lot, their charisma starts to just build off each other. The two actors build off each other well, but watching Han himself for the majority of the movie, it's just not interesting. He's just not a great actor. Another problem with these Star Wars anthology movies is just that there's a complete lack of stakes. Because they're prequels, you know exactly who's gonna live and exactly who's gonna die, and it feels like by the end that it just, none of it mattered, because it's a prequel and the future events are gonna happen regardless. Rogue One had this problem as well, but the problem was alleviated. It wasn't as big of a deal in Rogue One, because the whole plan of Rogue One was to get the plans of the Death Star to the Rebel base. That's an important plot point of the future movies. This is just a random couple of ventures with Han Solo just for the heck of it. It doesn't really matter. So there's a complete lack of stakes in this movie. The first act is slow. Han himself is so not charming. And the third act is so predictable. Oh man, the last 20 to 30 minutes of this movie, I just sat in my chair. Even my friend, I took a close friend of mine to see this film with me, and she has not seen any other Star Wars movies, and she completely called the ending. The third act is a complete mess, so predictable, so boring, and that's basically Solo in a nutshell. It's just a good enough movie with some passable action sequences and an uncharismatic lead, a couple laughs here and there, but as a whole, the humor just largely fell flat in this movie for me. At its peak, I was mildly entertained while watching Solo. At its worst, I was completely bored. This is by far the most boring movie I've seen in the theaters all year, and I'm gonna give Solo, A Star Wars Story, 2.5 out of 5 stars. Not very fun. There are a lot of better movies you could see this Memorial Day weekend. See Infinity War another time. See Deadpool 2, especially if you like the first one. See Deadpool 2. You will have a much better time than Solo. Even if you're a diehard Star Wars fan, you're gonna enjoy the references. You're gonna enjoy the battles. But as a whole, this is far from the best Star Wars film. It's even closer to the prequels. As far as the prequels go, those are slow and crappy movies, but at least they had excitement in them, in their action pieces and their lightsaber battles. This movie is a bore. It's just a bore. Not very much fun. 2.5 out of 5 stars. Would not recommend. I'm Pac. Thanks so much for hearing my perspective. If you like this video, please like, comment, share your thoughts on this movie and my review as well. I enjoy feedback. Thanks so much for watching, and I'm out for now.